So does the road to control of the Senate run through Utah? To find out, let's bring in Julia Manchester, national politics reporter for The Hill. Julia, great to have you. So Utah has been a reliably, red state for decades, last electing a Democrat to the U.S. Senate in 1970. So how much of a chance does Evan McMullin have at defeating incumbent Republican Senator Mike Lee?
Yeah, Kelly, it's interesting. Watching that debate, seeing these two candidates really spar over Trump was fascinating because we know that this is a very unusually close Senate race for a state that is reliably red. So we'll really have to see. We know that the polls are relatively close for Utah Senate race. But at the same time, though, I would say that Senator Lee definitely has that incumbent advantage. He has that advantage because he is well known in the state. He's a known commodity. He has been the sitting senator. He has a national profile. He has more money. So if I were a betting woman, I would say this definitely goes on Mike Lee. But at the same time, though, I think it's very telling that someone like Evan McMullin is very much on his heels in a lot of the polling. So we'll have to see. But it's definitely fascinating given that Utah is such a reliably red state. At the same time, though, it's interesting because you have figures like Senator Mitt Romney from Utah, who I wouldn't say is necessarily a moderate Republican, but he's certainly not a pro-Trump Republican, obviously. So, maybe some of that is being mixed in here, if you will. Some of that may be anti-Trump or, not so keen on Trump sentiment.
So, Julia, how did Utah become such a wild card in this election cycle, in your view?
It's hard to say. I think right now, obviously, we see that Republicans have that national advantage, but I think a lot of this potentially goes back to Trump and the role he's played in a lot of these elections. You have someone like Senator Mike Lee, who has occasionally disagreed with President Trump, but isn't necessarily, in the, anti-Trump category like Mitt Romney is. But you definitely have a bit of a libertarian streak in the state. It might not be in some sectors purely conservative. So I think there's a number of factors playing into this. But, I think it's surprising for a lot of us political watchers, who are paying attention to these big Senate races such as Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, to see Utah really in the past couple of days or past week pop up as this major state.
So recent polling shows Republicans have a slight edge over Democrats. With 3 weeks to go until Election Day, 49% of likely voters say they're more likely to vote for Republican candidates, with 45% of likely voters leaning toward Democratic candidates. So should the GOP feel confident in their chances as we round the corner in this campaign, Julia?
What's interesting, Kelly, is that over the past couple of months, ever since the Inflation Reduction Act was passed over the summer, we have seen that President Biden and Democrats have gotten a number of key legislative wins. They have been riding this wave of momentum. And a lot of us in the political watching industry were saying, OK, for a while, we thought Republicans had this in the bag. However, the tide has really turned for Democrats. But this is what's changing right now, Kelly. We are seeing gas prices rising. We are seeing a very dark economic outlook really start to rise again. And that is playing in Republicans' favor because they are not representing the status quo here. So I think as you see these economic indicators swing back and forth, it's impacting which party is ahead in this generic ballot polls. That being said, though, I would say that Republicans have the best chance in the House and in a number of governor's mansions. I think in the Senate, it's still very much a wild card race. At the same time, though, in Nevada, for example, where you have Adam Laxalt, or in Pennsylvania with Dr. Mehmet Oz, you are seeing those two Republican candidates really start to give their Democratic opponents a run for their money in a way. They're, in Mehmet Oz's case, he's still behind John Fetterman, but he's really seen a tick up in the polls. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
All right, Julia Manchester, we appreciate your insight as always. Thank you. And a reminder, NewsNation is the exclusive network home of the Pennsylvania Senate debate, the only place you can watch Dr. Oz face off against John Fetterman. Coverage begins Tuesday, October 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern on Debate Night in America. That will be live from Harrisburg.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.